Choosing the right architect takes more than just looking at beautiful photos on a website. In this episode, Tim, Daniel, and I discuss how to find the right architect for your job, how the builder and architect collaborate during the design phase, and what our personal recommendations are for getting a good construction drawing set from your architect.
Let's start off with the architect, or how do you pick an architect? I've always thought that really one of the main things is sort of personality alignment. Like it's somebody that you have to get along with, and it's somebody whose work that you like, obviously. But so what do you think is the process there? How do you figure that out? So you're looking online and you see all these beautiful pictures, but what do you do? How do you reach out to them and set up an interview? Like, is that what you do? Give them a call?
Like slowly.
We're looking at you as the architect.
It's funny. I think a lot of people, there's not like a lot of us, but everyone knows what an architect is, kind of, and sort of what they do. And I think a lot of times people get connected because they have a mutual friend or an acquaintance, or it's like, well, you're the only architect I know, so I'm going to ask you. And maybe if I'm not a good fit, I can make recommendations. So that's one way. It's just like simple sort of natural relationships. When I was working for myself, I had like a contact form on the website. People would frequently email me through that, and I would set up a phone call with them. And I typically would have a handful of questions, almost like our current like intake form for when someone reaches out, just like, what's your property address? What's the scope of work? What's your budget? What's your timeline look like? Do you have any inspiration or sort of like big idea of what you're wanting in terms of style? And then after that, be able to determine whether or not it seemed like a good fit for me. And if it is, I think the next step is looking in person, if I can, at a site or at a house, if it's a remodel, and getting a good sense of what the scope actually is, and putting together a proposal, just outlining what my services would be and what the fee would be. And if they accept it, just start work. But sometimes I think it looks like a lot of times I would get referrals from other professionals who are not architects also. Like a lot of times if they know a structural engineer, an interior designer, or if there's someone I'm used to working with, typically the structural engineer, I primarily would use one, and, the client is just going to use who I recommend.
Right.
So I think that's one way.
I've, so having personally having had interviewed architects for my own personal houses, I find it can be a little intimidating reaching out to somebody that you don't know. But after having done it several times, you realize that these are just people that are looking for work also, and, are happy to have the opportunities. Sure. But I think also too, like, you should be somewhat realistic on who you choose to interview, because this is going to be an extreme example, but if you really like this commercial architect that does these great big, public works kinds of projects, and you're doing a kitchen renovation, obviously that's not going to work. So, looking through their portfolio and seeing what types of work they do, and it somewhat has to align, but also, they don't necessarily post all of their pictures online. So
it's kind of hard sometimes.
There is a little bit there where you're just taking a chance. And if you really like somebody's work, getting to know them and seeing if it would be a good fit.
Yeah, because there's like kind of the style or aesthetic component, and then also size typically is a...
That's right. Not every, and this is not only true of architects, but home builders and interior designers as well. Not every professional is a good fit for every project. So not only is it commercial versus residential, sometimes it's custom versus, remodeling. And it has to do with price point that they all specialize in, because just speaking from the standpoint of a home builder, every home builder over time finds their niche, the types of projects that they specialize in by the nature of the supplier chain that they put together and the subcontractor team that they assemble, and the skill set and the level of complexity that each of those subcontractors and suppliers are able to master or perform might mean that one subset of contractor trade resources is more expensive because they have to hire and pay more expensive professionals to master those
Sure.
more complex details.
Yeah.
Whereas if a project is a little simpler or more straightforward, it may not require that level of expertise, and therefore it may be able to be accomplished at a lower price point.
Right.
Now, I don't want anybody to make decisions based on price. That's certainly not a great recommendation, whether it's choosing architect or home builder, interior designer. But certainly finding a good fit is important.
Yeah.
And that's one of the criterion is finding the niche that each of those individuals has found for themselves.
Yeah. And sometimes too, I mean, this is also a way that I've found subcontractors just being aware of what's going on around you in your neighborhood, who's doing work. You know, typically an architect or a builder will post signs on a project that they're
That's
proud
a really
of.
good
Great place to
recommendation.
start.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're driving through your own neighborhood and lots of those houses are similar, then you'll get a feel of, hey, I really like what these guys do, and they do it on houses like mine.
Right. And if you know those neighbors that are having that work done, talk to them about their experiences with the people they hired.
Sure. Yeah, that's great point.
Yeah. If a client already has a lot and they already have a fairly good idea of the design style they want, is it better to hire an architect first or a home builder first?
I don't think it matters, to be honest, if they both get engaged early.
It depends.
It depends. Yeah.
I think it could go either way. I think really the key is, regardless of who you hire first, don't go too far down the rabbit hole or too far along in the process before you hire the other. I mean, it would be difficult to hire a builder first and start to design a house without an architect. But I think that those two should go closely together. Sometimes if you have no idea what you want and there's no conceptual design whatsoever, you got to work some of that stuff out before you really talk to a builder. Otherwise, there's not much for the builder to do at that point. So I guess having said all that out loud, probably I would say hire the architect first. Is my opinion.
As a home builder, I don't have any problem in agreeing with that. That great place to start is the design and the concept of what the project scope might look like before a builder can react to that and respond to what it might cost or how long it might take or the complexities to overcome on the site. The builder has to have some idea what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And if you have a relationship with a builder already, it would be wise to reach out to them and get recommendations for the architects that they enjoy working with.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about why it's important to put the builder and the architect together as early as possible. What is that dynamic between those two professionals going to create for the client during the design?
Well, I think at a high level, the two things that come to mind first, the builder's ability to help ensure that the house is buildable. Constructability.
Right.
And then also the builder's ability to inform the team on what the potential costs are going to be as the design develops.
Right.
So that you're not designing something that's, way outside of the budget and then having to redesign.
Yeah. I think we've developed a fairly interesting process to give meaningful feedback to the architect and the client early in the process as to the potential range of cost that a given concept might have. And I think that's something that the architect and the client can use to determine which direction they head in the design relative to what the potential cost might be in the beginning. And it's very hard for a builder to determine with any degree of accuracy what costs might be in a preliminary concept.
Right.
But having heard what the owner's ideas are and what the architect's concepts might be, and looking at the site that the project is going to be built on, we already have some foundational information that we can weigh our experience on the last 5 to 10 projects that we've done and say, this project is similar to those projects in this respect, and therefore that speaks to what the cost might be relative to what it has proven to be in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a great starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Secondarily to that, how do we continue to develop that during the design?
Continuing to be a part of that process allows us to get more granular with the pricing, but also the details. Really just being a partner to the design team throughout, and that it would include, any of the engineering professionals that come into that process.
Right.
And helping, be a partner to the team.
Right. Each one of those design professionals, whether it's some type of engineer, whether it's structural, mechanical, civil, is providing additional detailed information that will more narrowly define what the cost will be. Right. Because it's infilling all the information that the builder doesn't have. Same thing with the interior designer. Beginning to make the selections and specify interior details is more information that the builder can more accurately focus in on what the ultimate budget for the project should be.
Yeah.
Right? How do most architects feel about that type of interaction and that type of feedback during the design? Does it help them or does it sometimes hinder them? Yeah. Explain that. Yeah.
An architect or any professional can only know so much, and so we rely on other professionals in the industry to inform us and help us coordinate and give us pricing information. And so, I think it's architecture, engineering, and construction is a very collaborative, team-based approach in most cases.
Yeah. My observation, having done it here, it's always appreciated. It is a group effort, and I haven't really found an instance where the architect has not wanted us involved.
I think one thing that's telling of that is a lot of times, we have conversations in the background. I feel like our job, whether on the design side or construction, is to make the client's life easier.
Mm-hmm.
We're providing a service where obviously there's a lot of interaction with the client to come up with the design and to make selections and to execute and get approval. But there's a lot of conversations that happen. Architects call us with questions. Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I think just the other day, probably I heard you on the phone with an architect talking kind of troubleshooting. It's kind of and I think if you don't have someone you can call, if the client hasn't already engaged a builder, you don't really have someone you can call unless you have a really good friend that you're hoping that they hire, because you're getting free advice, when you have questions like that come up.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's great when you have those relationships and you're okay, this person is invested in this project. I can call them up and say, hey, thinking about doing this roof assembly like this. Is this going to be problematic for you by the time it gets to the eve and it has this condition and I want to achieve this? What are the options here? What's the best way to construct this? Is that going to break their budget? There's the aesthetic component and the budget component and just the pain, the hassle that comes into coordinating all the parts. So there's a lot of coordination that can happen behind the scenes if you hire people who are willing to collaborate with each other.
Yeah, and I think too, the architect recognizes that, we are not trying to influence the design. That's not what we're doing. And by being that partner throughout, it's more than likely that the architect's vision will come to fruition, as opposed to them, designing this whole thing and then having it sort of set and then finding a builder and realizing, oh, this part's not going to work. And so now we have to change it. Whereas we can really ensure that the architect's vision is met.
Right. I think my experience is that architects do incredible work pushing the limits of design so that they can create unique, interesting, enjoyable places and spaces for clients to live in. And it seems to be that they rely on us to let them know how their cutting edge designs or unique designs can be put together in a way that will perform well and be done economically and efficiently so that it meets all the clients' goals, not just be a beautiful home, but be very, very expensive, but be a beautiful home that's affordable and practical and endures over a long period of time.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good point, is the enduring part of it, right? If an architect goes through the trouble of designing a home, they want it to last as well, as much as the homeowner does.
And also, like, there's a lot of times, I've drawn like wall assemblies before and not had a builder engaged yet, and wanted to know, like, do you guys have a preference for even something as simple as like a rain screen mat or battens? Like, what's easier to, or what do you have more experience doing? A lot of times it really is just a matter of preference.
That's true.
So, like, wanting to make things easier and smoother and for the people in the future.
I think that's a great point. And I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying. There are a lot of design elements and a lot of finishes and shapes that will ultimately appear and live a certain way. But what's behind them and what allows those things to perform and last a long time are the mechanical and structural components that the builder helps assemble together that make the house work well. Mm-hmm. And I think knowing those elements and what those design constraints are to achieve that are very important to the architect to pull off what they're trying to do.
Yeah. That sort of got a little bit talked around, but should we talk about what somebody should expect to get from an architect? Like, what do those deliverables look like, and what level of detail or decisions are the architects making or not making?
Or even just like what's a solid set of drawings?
Yeah,
look
what is
like?
this? That's a great way to put it. What does a solid set of drawings
maybe
look
not
like?
Tell us, what are the basic components?
What do you want to see?
Cover
I think
page.
that's something
That's a great question.
I think that's something that you
Yeah.
guys should answer. Like, what would you consider sort of like, these are the basics and like almost the like non-negotiables? Like, if you were paying an architect, what would you want to see them draw for you
Well, I'm going to list out
in the construction set?
6 or 8, and then you guys add to that, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to start out just obviously floor plans and an elevation of each side, right?
Exterior elevation.
Exterior elevations, right? We need a roof plan so we know what it looks like from the sky looking down. Certainly we need, whether it's architect-driven or engineer-driven, we need a foundation plan and a skeletal plan, what we call the structural plan, showing how it's structurally assembled,
Yep.
right? Then we need to know what the interior looks like. We need the same thing. I mean, if you think about all the surfaces on the outside that you want to see, we want to see the same surfaces from the inside out. So we want to see wall elevations, cabinet elevations. We want to see what it would look like laying on the floor looking up, what we call a reflected ceiling plan. Those are just fundamental basic elements right there. If we start with there, that's a basic set of plans. Mm-hmm. What's next?
I would say you absolutely have to have a window and door schedule.
Yes.
So, not necessarily calling out specific window models or manufacturers, although that's great when they do. But really the details of each window, which way does it swing? How big are the frames? What size opening do they go into? And then if, we can get some level of detail of how it attaches to that opening. And then same thing with doors. Like what size are the doors? Which way do they swing? And both interior and exterior doors.
Right.
To me, those are must-haves as well.
Right.
Yeah. What about, we're just like getting into more and more deals.
Yeah.
What about like I think a basic set of like details or sections would be some wall sections for like typical wall sections.
Yeah.
And then like details at bottom and top of wall, some roof details for what the eave or rakes or kind of soffits, ridge, just like how things are put together there.
Yeah. And to be more specific on each one of those details, have all of the layers called out specifically.
And I think another kind of aspect of that is like I would usually have like an assemblies, like wall assemblies, roof assemblies, floor, like essentially these are like small details. You know, floor plan is just a cut through the house, 3 foot up off the ground, looking down into the house. So elevations are looking at side views, sections or details or section, like wall sections are cuts typically vertically looking at things. Looking at walls, what are all the different layers in all the walls? What are the layers in the roof? Looking at kind of like how we protect the house from water.
Yeah.
Right.
And, ideally too, with like the exterior elevations and those wall details, knowing what is the cladding, what is the exterior cladding, what is the roofing material. Again, not necessarily calling out specific manufacturers or even color
but like
at that
at
point.
least like stone, stucco, siding.
Yeah.
Right.
How are those? So then you can see the interactions of those materials with one another and how they get put on the wall.
Right.
I would typically say like a finish schedule, a plumbing schedule, an electrical fixture schedule, appliance schedule.
Yeah.
Those are all really helpful in the same way. Like maybe it's a generic call out, but at least I know I've got like, I can go through and count the number of toilets and the number of sinks. And that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's one other aspect on one other detail I want to talk about. But before we do that, let's say to clarify what you're discussing in terms of schedules, whether they're finished schedules
a table of
Yeah,
things.
I was going to say, should we, because maybe not everybody knows what a schedule is.
Right. And it's just a listing of different components of the house, whether they're electrical components or plumbing components or whatever. There's a difference between calling out a type of fixture or a type of device versus calling out a manufacturer and a model number. Now, I think fundamentally what we would like to see as builders are schedules that at least call out the types of products that are being used or specified.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
And then the interior designer team and the owner might ultimately go and select specific model numbers or specific colors for each of those things.
it depends on who you're working with, but like, typically during that DD phase, you might have the schedule, which is just a table of typically listed by room for if we're talking about lights.
Right.
I've got 10 sconces and this number recessed and this number of pendants, and then it gets kind of worked out into more detail as we get closer to construction or in construction.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of that, means we need an electrical plan. We need to know where plugs are, where switches are, where light fixtures are located.
Sometimes that's on the reflected
ceiling plan, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't. Reflected ceiling plans don't always give the full electrical details about where all the other devices are.
Yeah.
So generally, there's a supplement, which is a more broadened electrical plan.
Yeah.
somewhere.
Well, it is helpful, I think, to homeowners to have an idea or some input where the switches go, because that's what the thing they'll be interacting with on a daily basis.
Right.
At least starting that in the plans.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, probably the most fundamental of all these documents is the site plan.
Oh, I thought you were going to say cover page.
The title block.
Abbreviations.
Yeah.
Yeah, site plan.
Site plan is basically the overall conceptual design of where everything's going to go on the building site. it has dimensional information on it. It has legal information on it about setbacks and easements. Generally has outbuildings if necessary, pools, hardscape, which is walkways, driveways, planters, those things. Oftentimes it can even have landscaping, although you can't get too much information on the site plan or it's too cluttered. And landscaping should often be done on a separate document to give more detail as far as plants and irrigation system or landscape lighting. Those are, again, supplemental drawing sets.
Yeah. What do you guys think about having renderings, like 3D renderings in the plan sets? Is that helpful for people? Is that just extra stuff that's on there that's not really useful?
I have major mixed feelings about this because often renderings are not accurate. And so sometimes I think, and because they're easier to digest, I think that we tend to look at those first and neglect the information that's actually to a scale with, information called out. So I think they're helpful as a a supplemental drawing, but they shouldn't be seen as the primary drawing.
Oh, I agree. It seems like many architects use it sort of on the cover page as a smaller image so that people can say, oh, yeah, this is the right house. That's the house I'm seeing take shape.
Or it's like a big even.
It doesn't really have any basis in reality as far as dimensions or specifics to the details, but at
the same time, sometimes I've had some projects, especially if it's some kind of really detailed drawing where I've gotten really into cutting a lot of how components are coming together for a custom built-in, shelving type thing or banquette, where sometimes I will put some simple three-dimensional renderings on the same page as the details to help them.
This context.
Where I'm treating it more as an isometric or an axon drawing. Yeah, for context. So they can understand, that's just that in cut.
More often for interior details than exterior though, right?
No, I've done it before with even an eave return. I don't know.
Pork chop?
Yeah. No, to avoid the pork chop.
To avoid the pork chop. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Things that involve a little bit more. Sometimes I think some people are skilled at looking at the two-dimensional drawings and assembling that in their head, but I think sometimes it's helpful to.
I think it is a bit of a double-edged sword too, because if it's either, because the plans are frequently changing and sometimes the renderings don't get fully updated or all the components don't get updated.
So the color.
So it can be confusing. And then, if it's not photorealistic, then just like sometimes people have trouble interpreting plans, they've also have trouble interpreting those 3D renderings and that's an ugly house. And well, no, it's actually beautiful, but it's just gray, whatever, it's just a bad rendering or something. Yeah. But I do think it is a very valuable tool for people to be able to visualize what it is that they're building.
Clients, homeowners, don't do this every day. It's not typically natural for them to be able to look at two-dimensional design and understand it three-dimensionally. Oftentimes, some are much better than others just because they have some ability to see things in 3D that some of us don't have. But it's a great tool for an architect or a cabinet fabricator, for example, doing shop drawings to let people sort of live in a 3D image so that they can see how they could possibly interact with that space. Yeah. As long as they don't pay too much attention to the detail and rely on that as what it's actually going to be.
It's a little bit if you get an IKEA cabinet or something, it's if you see a picture of it for context, you're okay, I know what but you're not going to use that to build the cabinet.
Right.
Or you shouldn't.
You should.
Got to see the little guys with the little, the weird tools.
I don't do shop drawings.
The Allen wrenches? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is good. I mean, I think that if anything, we would like to inform a home buyer, home building community, the client that we might ultimately interact with, that it can be and should be a very enjoyable, rewarding experience, that if the right team is assembled, the right fit is put together for a given project, that the chances of it being successful and the client being happy with it at the end are very, very high.
Yeah.
But it's important that it's choosing the right people and being thoughtful about that process and finding people that will stay engaged and participate throughout, ultimately yields great results.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Good. Anything else you want to talk about on this?
So much.
So much. We'll have an infinite number of opportunities in subsequent podcasts.
Yeah. That's it for another episode of Work in Process. Thanks for listening. If you've got a question, a topic suggestion, or want to start a project with us, send an email to hello@risingerbuild.com.
You can also find us on Instagram at risingerbuild_ATX or on YouTube by searching Risinger Build. We'd love to hear from you.